And then, of course, the social funk and griots are basically troubadours or musical storytellers in Africa. We have the same equivalents in the rest of the world, actually. In the States, there are solo acoustic bluesmen that you see in the railroad and stuff like that. Of course, they also serve a work purpose in the penitentiary, in the prison gangs, in the plantation. They were the music that were being sung and played by the slaves. So as I mentioned, the blues as a complete style actually grew from a lot of sources, including spirituals, field hollers, shouts and chants, and rhymed simple narrative ballads. In terms of time frame, probably started in the late 1800s, probably 1880, something like that. But there is a record of people witnessing blues being played as a mature form in the early 1900s, specifically 1902, 1903. This is around the time that guys like W.C. Handy and artists like Ma Rainey, who later become very popular blues artists in 1920s. When they said when they were a kid, they heard this music being played, and that's how they started learning the song, almost like learning a lullaby or a children's song. So let's go to the main basic elements of the music itself. Basically, the rhythm is 4/4. So we're using quarter notes. In the early blues, this was really just quarter notes, but later on, these were really 8 notes now. So the rhythm got more sophisticated. And of course, later on, we'll talk about the blues shuffle. If I could walk you through that just right now, it's basically this, no? Except you have to have a tuned guitar. My point is actually that didn't happen until very much later, the development of the blues. And that's mostly what we hear, but really I'll show you examples of blues that weren't shuffled. Okay, in terms of melody, this is kind of tricky. Blues has minor and major sort of interplay going on. Sometimes it sounds like it's minor, but the harmony is sometimes major, or mostly major, but when somebody's singing it or playing a solo, it's playing around with those two harmonies. And very, very noticeable is the use of a lot of use of third, fifth, and seventh in their flatted form, interpreting from the major scale. So as I mentioned, the harmony is minor, major, and then the use of dominant 7 is very common. So you'll have chords that almost always have this 7th chord in there. So in the beginning, there was just one chord and one beat. Or just like that. It's not even that. So the verses also were very, they call this floating verses. Basically, they're copying verses from each other. These are folk traditions. So this was all before the age of copyright and record albums, so all verses being used by all the artists. In the second generation, what I call second generation, they started adding more chords in there and longer verses, and in fact repeating verses. And there was a concluding verse. Except the repeating verses are sometimes 2, sometimes 3. Repeated twice or thrice, and then. But now there was already a concluding verse, which was an important development because eventually we came to the 12-bar blues where you have 2 repeated verses almost as a standard format. See? So you repeat the first line, and then almost always they rhyme. And the third line is also rhymed, but it's a different verse. And almost always it's a concluding line with a twist, or a punchline, as we would call it. You know? There are other kinds of blues aside from 12-bar. There are 8-bar blues. So show examples later of this, but basically it's like this. Something like that. Just trying to go through this quickly because I wanted to focus on making the music. Other unique elements, many times blues, especially jazz blues, has a trance-like quality. It has a propulsive rhythm, as you can hear from the shuffle. I think the shuffle is really an imitation of the train sound. If you, I don't know if you listen to trains that much, but maybe they were trying to copy the train sound. Bluesmen were going to copying a lot of other sounds actually. Color response is a very important aspect of it. I'll show that later in the performance. But color response basically came out of, in fact, there's a utility or utilitarian purpose for that because in work songs and prison gangs and plantations, they needed to be working in rhythm. So somebody was doing one thing and the other guy needed to be doing something in sync. So call and response was a very important feature of the way they sang and played music. And of course it carried over into the music, even in terms of entertainment for us solo artists. Instruments of choice, I mentioned guitar, but also the use of a bottleneck. This is a real bottleneck made from wine glass. Neck of a wine glass, wine bottle. Of course, the use of harmonica, which you will hear more of later. Blues has a very vocal approach. Basically, it's really a vocal music. It's really meant to be sung, blues is. But of course, many instrumentalists use and play blues. And one of the best qualities of blues music is that it really relates to people because it's a vocal approach. Embellishment or melisma is very common. Artists and singers like to add a little bit to the melodies, and that's also because they like to improvise. So improvisation, and when you say blues jam, is basically improvisation from start to finish, just basing on that one beat and 3 chords, one beat and 3 chords to change the word. So I'll walk you through some of the rules of this blues styles, and maybe mention some of the what I call fruits, because these styles basically give birth to rock and roll, to some folk music in the 60s, rockabilly, a lot of other things. Of course, jazz also, although they influence each other. So as I mentioned, in the beginning there was one chord. Bluesmen have made a career out of that one chord, like John Lee Hooker and other guys, or R.L. Burnside. And, as I mentioned, call and response is a very important feature of blues. Just one example.
make me weak. You met me in the morning, and it calls me to me.
Eventually, more chords. they just keep adding more chords to them. So, for example, this is from a style from Blind Lemon Jefferson. This guy was not from the Delta, from the Mississippi Delta, but from Texas. At some point somebody invented the 12-bar blues. I don't know how and don't know who, but the first artist I heard do this style was Charlie Patton. Charlie Patton is basically born in the 1900s, probably 1878. And when he started making records, he was an old guy already playing this style. So imagine that if you played that as a kid. Not just to feel, not just to feel. I will get back home. A lot of bluesmen used to break their guitars all the time from all that slapping. Paul William was, as I mentioned, a very important part of the blues style that came from Africa. They want somebody invented different kind of blues, 8-bar blues. Show you how it goes around. Woman I love, whom I'm my best friend, said that I'm lucky, told it back again. I get broke, say no, you're good.
Yeah.
Something like that. Some guys say that the slide style actually, it really came from Africa, but there's a proof that Africans are playing slide using some, smooth instrument along a string. So they got this slide on there, and there's proof of this also being done in the United States. But very strong traditional slide guitars actually happening in Hawaii around the same time that this was coming up. And there's a definite Hawaiian influence that came in the 1920s. Something like that, or no Hawaiian. For this, I'm gonna change guitars.
Tell us about that guitar. What is it?
I was told to talk about that. But it is a dobro. No, it's dobro style, but it's really a regular resonator guitar. There's a aluminum coat under here. Basically, it's acting like a speaker. So the bridge is acting as a transducer. The bridge, of course, the strings sit on the bridge, and the bridge is connected to the cone. The cone is acting like a speaker. It's amplifying and it's also projecting sound, except I'm actually plugged in, so I'm using a under there. So it's not much use for the cone in this case. But the sound is still there because the pickups is also attached to the cone. So thank you to Cowboy for doing this. This is doing my guitar also. Okay, next we'll talk about this guitar. This is actually custom-made guitar. It's done in Cebu by craftsman in Cebu. Still have good craftsmen in Cebu.
Yeah.
But this style is very reminiscent of what bluesman in the 1920s, 1930s might use. They used to go for like what, $6 in Sears and Roebuck catalog. But if you notice, this style, many of you will recognize it's like a classical style headstock. Many guitars nowadays don't have this headstock. If you go to the stores, usually not this style, unless it's a classical guitar. But steel string guitars in the old days are like this. So it's a very traditional look. It doesn't even have the the logo of the brand here. So it's not even a Martin. It's just a Martin copy. Okay. The shape is also not like a folk guitar like we would see normally in a mall. So. Gospel was also a very big influence on blues, but I think it goes both ways. Many bluesmen used to sing in gospel choir, in gospel bands. They would play in a blues club on a Saturday night and be up in the morning to play in church. So there's that sort of tension. That one, for example, was Brian Willie Johnson's big deal around the blues circles at that time. But he actually almost exclusively played gospel. So that's weird because he was a gospel guy, was very much accepted in the blues circle. But in the old days, that was sort of a no-no. You don't play blues if you're really a gospel guy. So we come to the blues shuffle. Finally, something we recognize. So, as I mentioned, it's just basically cornrows is syncopated. Whoa, baby, don't you wanna go?
Yeah.
So I first heard that from Robert Johnson, whom you've probably heard of also. A very big bluesman at the time, and also because of the devil legend that he sold his soul to the devil. It was very popular later on, still selling records about 50 years after he died. Blues ballads. Around 1920s, a lot of female blues singers were very popular selling records. Their records sold for a lot of units around the South. And they were very popular. And in fact, country bluesmen started copying the balladeer female blues singers. So it was a different sort of both the influence going back. And piano started to be incorporated in that. Here's an example from, I think, Scrapper Blackwell. Beautiful. When the night I woke, long before the break of day. When the night I woke, long before the break of day.
Yeah.
Eventually, ragtime actually is a piano tradition, right?
Yeah.
So Scott Joplin and all that guys. I think it may even predate blues because it came from classical tradition from Europe. So, but they syncopated it. So that piano ragtime style came into the blues, and really, actually, it didn't so much as influence rock. It influenced more, I think, folk and rockabilly, in fact. So here's an example that actually is probably close to rockabilly. Oh, there. You just need to play the beat, right? It's a boom chuck, right? Instead of, it's not even, it's could show you an example. Everybody recognize that, right? So you could drag any tune actually. Okay. There's a different kind of blues style that came up in Benton. It's very minor type of blues. Something like this. Ba't yun yun? Hindi na yun? Tumatagal. Hindi nyo na yung commercial, babata yun. That's a commercial from, I guess, decades ago. Wait, alam ni Sir Cox. Or rock commercial, yes. But the point is, blues, as I mentioned earlier, has really gotten into our mainstream already. Maybe you don't know it, but it really came from the blues. And I guess the most common ones are the beer commercials, etc. Okay, in Texas, basically there were less sort of organized organs there. Plantations and penitentiaries were common in Mississippi, especially in the Delta. But in Texas, basically, many bluesmen were basically alone in the free-ranging bluesmen. So they were probably more, they had more freedom to construct their songs. Country guy named Muddy Waters, McKinley Morgan, to went off to Chicago, along with thousands of other actually Mississippi locals, and basically went to Chicago to make it in the world as laborers, but also more importantly as musicians. We all know this riff, right?
Yeah.
If you went to a Patay City recently, this riff is sure there, but burlesque rhythm. So that riff came from the blues, and it's a riff popularized by Muddy Waters. This is a riff that actually, the song that actually made him strike it big in Chicago and spark basically the Chicago blues style, and also spawn imitators from England and America to start blues rock, which made blues even more popular. Well, I believe I was a captive, swimming in the water, deep blue sea. Got all you know, she not me, she not me. Oh, Lord, oh, well, sure.
Wala na akong nararamdaman sa kanang kamay ko.
I really don't know anybody else in the Philippines
Okay.
that could have done that. He really knows his
Sa akin
history
din. Correct.
and knows how to get into it. So, Delta Slim, thank you very much. And,